Okay, so hopefully right before this you just watched a wonderful example of how to break up a lecture and make students far more active in participating in a lecture. We just did a fishbowl and we did a popcorn lecture, but as you know, after you watched that, we didn't get through all of the different elements of the popcorn lecture about listening. And so there were a few things on the handout that you have in your module that I wanted to highlight. One thing that we didn't talk about with the students is, what do we do if students can't hear a sound in English? And this often happens because once a baby is about 6 months old, they begin to notice only the sounds that are being produced by their caregivers. And they begin to only produce those sounds as well. So they're hearing them, they're producing them. And so what that means is that down the road, when they begin learning English, whether they're a kindergartner or they are 50 years old, whatever, if they can't hear a sound in English, it's probably because there's an impact from their first language. And so what might you do for them? Usually where we go is to provide students with evidence that this sound exists in English, that it's different than other related sounds, and that it makes a difference. There's a difference in meaning. So what could you do, for example? You could show students a series of pictures, and the pictures match up with minimal pairs. For example, you could show a picture of a sheep, and you could show a picture of a ship, and show the students what the words look like, and say the words, and help them recognize that that if there is a difference between the E and the I sound, that both do exist in English, and that it makes a huge difference in meaning. And so usually starting out with minimal pairs is where we go with that. So helping them to be able to hear it. And then once you've kind of explained that, and often what it means is that students also can't produce it. And so showing them where their tongue needs to go, or kind of helping them figure out what it is that they're not doing to produce the sound, helping them to do that. And then what I like to do is like if I've got a class of 20, I will put those minimal pairs up on the board. I'll have column 1, column 2, and I will point at the first row, and I'll say one of them. And students, in front of their chest, they hold up either 1 if they think they hear 1, or 2 if they think they hear 2. And I continue to repeat the word over and over again until every person has the right number of fingers up. And so that is a way that you can help students begin to take those steps of being able to hear that difference. Another question that we didn't get to talk about with the group that I wanted to cover is, wouldn't the pre-dring and post-listening process be almost the same as the pre-dring post-reading process? This is an easy one, absolutely. You're really talking about 2 passive skills, just one that you're carrying out with your eye, one you're carrying out with your ear. But really, the menu of options that's waiting for you after this lecture, there's another kind of a template and outline of kind of menu options that you can use with supporting listening for pre, during, and post. It's really very similar. And it's almost, not quite, but almost identical to the list that I gave you from the scaffolded reading experiences. So you really do need to think about it really in the same way. A question, I don't know if it came up or not, but how do we engage students rather than bore them with listening? I just want to emphasize, even though we kind of talked about these ideas earlier, is students need to have a role. They need to have a clear role with every element of listening that you're carrying out. Whether it's listening to a fellow student give a presentation, whether it's watching a video, whatever it is, give them a reason to listen. And that's how you'll shoo boredom out of your classroom. Any other questions I wanted to make sure and cover? How can we help students recognize vocabulary that they have learned when listening? I don't remember if this one was covered or not, but I wanted to emphasize one of the things that you really want to think about with supporting listening is think about the materials that you are giving students. Just like when we talked about how do you scaffold up and then take away the scaffolding for students, a lot of that answer is the materials that you are giving students. So for example, with a group of students who were struggling with moving from BICS vocabulary to CALP vocabulary, so this group was in Nicaragua, they were advanced English students, and they were really they recognized CALP vocabulary, but they were not producing it in any way. And I needed to kind of highlight it for them. And so I went backwards. Instead of focusing on speaking and writing, I went backwards to listening. And what I did was I came up with a list of vocabulary of the kinds of words I wanted them to be listening for. For example, fortunately, consequently, in addition. So there were lots of connectors like that, and then lots of other words as well. And so I gave them a handout that had those words listed, not in order. We went over them beforehand, and I had them just listen. I gave them a lecture like I give you lectures, and I had them just listen for those and circle them as they heard them. And so that was a step that we took, and that had to do with the materials. Another thing that you can do is you can provide students with whatever it is that they're listening to, and it's like a closed passage. So, and that's a fancy way, and that's spelled with a Z. That's a fancy way of saying you write out some of it, but there are some blanks. And so that might be another way to scaffold for them. So again, they're focusing on specific things. Notice how the materials scaffold, but also really focus the kind of task that your students are carrying out. Another thing you can do, like for a lecture, and I eventually did this with the CALP vocabulary for my students, is you can give an outline of a lecture that's just got the main pieces. Or it can be a more filled in outline and there's just some blanks for them to fill in. So that would get students listening at more of a discourse level, listening for, okay, are we still in the introduction? No, now we're in the body. Okay, where are we in the body? Oh, she just said third point, so I must be down in this area. So one thing to always think about when you have your students listening, think about the purpose, but also really, really important, think about the materials that you're putting in front of them. Another thing to keep in mind, if you've got, let's say you're teaching third grade and 20 of your students are native English speakers and 5 of your students are non-native speakers of English, and of those 5, 3 of them are really struggling with listening. Everyone can have some kind of listening guide they're using while they're watching the PBS video or while they're listening to the community member speak or whatever. But not all of the listening guides need to be the same. So this is one way that you can support listening individually for students. Is it more work? Absolutely. Keep it for next year or keep it for the next quarter or the next semester for the next set of students. But materials really is the way that you can really fine-tune around what your students need. Okay, so I think we covered most of the ideas, most of the key ideas around listening in that wonderful lecture with the students. Okay, go on to the chapter in your textbook. It doesn't specifically speak to listening, it's talking about vocabulary. And then there are lots of other resources waiting for you around vocabulary and then about listening as well. Okay, so I will see you in the discussion.